me. I'm doing well. I'm excited to talk about this. I was just selling your movie to people last night at dinner.
Oh, I love it. Please keep doing that.
I was my pleasure. I've been singing its praises, pun intended, since Sundance. But I was out with a couple of people who I know like, you know, a lot of different types of movies. I was like, wait, you know about this? And they were like, I started to explain like, oh no, we've seen a trailer. We're into it. So I was like, excellent, very good.
Oh, that's exciting. Well, I'm glad they've seen the trailer.
Yes, which I would hope so. It must be interesting because normally when you're a Sundance movie that everyone sort of immediately like takes to as like the movie, there's sort of a weird backlash that starts because it's popular, so it must not be good. But that didn't happen here. Is that like a sigh of relief and like, wait, everybody actually likes it? This is
I was waiting for it because there is a kind of Sundance bubble sometimes where, whatever it is, reviews or reactions come out of Sundance, but it's kind of like, oh, were you all just drinking the Kool-Aid and caught up in whatever was happening at Sundance? And that doesn't translate out into the world. And so I've been relieved and excited to see actually it go the other way and it build where it feels like the more people see it, the more people are excited about it and are spreading the word. So yes, that's totally an amazing thing to watch. And it might have something to do with that. Like Sundance wasn't in Park City this year, and it was like a much more democratic Sundance. So my parents' friends were watching and the captain of the boat we used were watching. And it wasn't kind of this exclusive little bubble. It was felt like a more anyone could participate who wanted to come. And so maybe that changed kind of that Sundance bubble or maybe I'll give myself credit for the movie that it's working and people are responding.
I'm gonna say at least partly the latter.
Okay, I'll take it. Okay, I'll take it.
But yeah, no, it was interesting to not be there, which there's good and bad to that. But it's on the one hand, I think easier to miss something because you don't have like if you're not on Twitter or whatnot, you're not gonna get the buzz of like, oh, the person walking by is talking about a movie, which is kind of fun. But you can, like you said, it's very democratic, and what people like is what's gonna get praised. And I almost missed it, honestly. I missed the first screening. I had to like double back after all the awards, and I was like, "Is this all right?" Turned it on and went, "Oh no, this is great."
You're like, "What is this worth it?" But that's. I mean, it's so funny because, like you said, I mean, Twitter after Sundance, we screened, and I went up and did the Q&A virtually, and then like went downstairs and my kids were going to bed and like my daughter, my 7-year-old was like, turn off your phone, like stop looking at your phone. And I was like, this is the only way that I can experience Sundance is to like be on my phone. So I did, I turned off my phone and like read her a book and put her to sleep. And it was just like an interesting, very low key way to experience probably the biggest thing that's happened to me as a filmmaker in my life.
Oh, yeah. Because you hear all the stories about my screening went so well, and then I was ushered off to dinner with someone to like buy my movie for millions of dollars. And you're like,
yes,
that sounds fun. I read a book to my kid, which is also fun. But
I read a book and ate cold Thai food with my husband and did a shot of tequila, and that was good too.
Like, I think I can make another movie. This is probably good news.
Exactly.
They'll probably even pay me to make another one. This is a great idea. But even sort of backtracking a bit, when did this become the thing that you wanted to make? Because it is a very specific type of movie, and it does take, I think, the desire to make it this way. There's so many ways you could make this movie, and there's a lot more mainstream way, and there's a lot more of like an indie aggressive way, and it finds this weird sweet spot where it really is, and this doesn't sound like a compliment, but it's for everyone. Like that usually means like very streamlined and doesn't offend anyone, but I think this has such a personality that makes it do that.
Yeah. And I think, when you're starting out, there's just kind of, I was looking at movies like that, though. I was looking at what are the movies that are maybe about a family or about young people, but kind of speak to everyone. I kept going back to like Running on Empty, or kind of like an old school kind of film that, yes, might be about a young person and involves a family, but that everyone can find a way in and everyone can find a way to connect to it. And I've been so delighted by the people that are responding to this movie, that it's not high school kids only. It's not middle-aged men. I'm hearing from all people from all walks of life, and people really see themselves in this story. I mean, I had a woman pull me aside. We just did a screening back in Gloucester, Massachusetts. And a woman came to the screening and she pulled me aside sobbing, honestly, in the bathroom when the movie was over. And she said, I just saw my story. And she actually, I knew was in the fishing community in Gloucester. And so I said, well, was that why? Was it because of the fishing stuff? And she said, no, I was a child of immigrants and I grew up, translating and interpreting for my parents all the time. And I felt all of this guilt leaving home, like I was abandoning my family, and I didn't know who I was in the world outside of them. And I feel like you just told my story. And it was so interesting to just have her feel such a direct connection to the story. And I think everybody has found their way into it, whether you had an embarrassing dad that like gave you a sex talk in front of your friend, or whether there's a way in for a lot of people. And that's really moving to me, because that's all you want as a filmmaker, is to be able to connect with your audience.
For sure. And I mean, I think it's really interesting that it can work on so many levels, even within the same idea. So the idea of having to translate for your parents, like you just said, can be an immigrant's tale. It doesn't have to be the way the story is portraying it, but it also is where some of the best comedy in the movie comes from. So it can be really heartwarming and dramatic and even sad at times, but also lead to like, I have to translate things about sex for my family. Nope, this is going to go the way I want it to. And those
right. Or I'm at the doctor's office, like having to describe my dad's like very colorful description of his own jock itch. Like that's mortifying. But, I think there's something very teenage in that, just that feeling of, my dad was from Hungary. I had immigrant parents. My dad wore a Speedo at the beach, and I was mortified that my dad thought that was like a cool bathing suit to wear at the beach. I think as a teenager, you're in this very precarious, time of life where you're trying to kind of be like everybody else. At the same time, your family is still very much defining you. And it's hard to individuate and figure out who you are out in the world without them. And so, yeah, I hope that a lot of people find their way into the story. And I find that the specificity of the culture and seeing this family, honestly, that we rarely have seen on screen before, and a culture that is so specific, in a way that specificity makes the story more universal. And I think people are able to connect with it because they can find all these parallels into something that they have experienced or can relate to.
For sure. I think the more generic you get, the easier it is for people to dismiss this, like, oh, this is just, Hollywood, or this is just not real. And here it feels like you obviously know it's a movie, but it has the feel of you're following real people. And even just like the movie or moments, like the scene at the doctor's office is like, would be the most quotable moment in the movie, and is what people are quoting, but they're quoting Sign, which is like it's a very odd way of saying like you clearly succeeded, but the fact that there's no barrier of entry is really an interesting success.
Well, and there were so many conversations when I was prepping the film about how much isn't hearing audience going to accept the silence and these long ASL scenes, and is an audience going to be patient for that? And and I love that nobody has said that to me about the film. Nobody has looked at the ASL as a barrier. And in fact, maybe you feel it in the early scenes, but by the end of the film, I don't think anyone is even noticing that they're watching sign language and reading subtitles. I think you're invested in that family and those characters. And that's an interesting lesson for me as a filmmaker, and something we really played with in the edit, to make sure that we were walking people into that experience and having a balance early on in the movie between music scenes, like these fun choir scenes, and dialogue scenes and ASL, so that you could sort of slowly step your audience into being comfortable in that world, so that towards the end of the film, when there's like 5 ASL scenes in a row and the audience is actually in silence for a very long time, they don't realize that they are, because they're just caught up in the story and they care about this family.
Oh, yeah, you can definitely see that there would have been a time, maybe even not super long ago, where getting the movie made, you can just hear the conversation with someone like, the more scenes you have with this, the less money we make. So every time you do this, we lose $15,000 or something like that. And just that being the only conversation is, we're willing to give you 3 scenes. You're like, but I have 35 written. Like, that's just not the movie I made. And I think it's a credit to I think the way we watch movies now, like I think people are more open to international films, documentaries, like things that aren't a traditional just people shooting guns, running around, things blow up, or people have sex, which granted I love too. But
Yeah.
there's
Well, and it's generational. I mean, it's like that argument, maybe from my generation, which is like, oh, you know, people aren't going to want to read subtitles. And you're like, teenagers now send 300 texts a day. Like
exactly.
they're having conversations, written conversations, and that's how they're absorbing, you know, dialogue basically.
Yeah.
So the idea that would be any kind of deterrent, or you know, there's also a tendency a lot of times when hearing characters and deaf characters are portrayed together on screen to have the hearing characters speak all the deaf actors' lines, or simcom, which is when you sign and speak at the same time, which is kind of butchering both languages, to be honest. Like you can't, ASL has a completely different word order and sentence structure. And so the moment that you are signing and speaking, you're actually just signing an English word order, and you're butchering the language of, you know, the expression of ASL. And so that was an early conversation. Like Ruby is not going to talk through these scenes. Like this is her native language. This is her family. There would be no reason for that to happen. So yeah, I'm relieved that I had producers that supported the way I wanted to make the film and kind of trusted me to be making those decisions that I felt very sure of.
Yeah.
And surrounding myself with collaborators, honestly, that knew more than I did. And having deaf eyes on set who could call out something when it didn't feel right and make sure that those ASL scenes felt really grounded and real. And, you know, the team around me was super important, and I wouldn't have been able to do it without them.
Well, I mean, it definitely works. And I think it's a credit not just to you being confident in the material, but also being smart enough to know what you didn't know in that sense.
Yeah.
Like, I think that's the other thing that so often happens is people may have the best of intentions, but they're like, but I'm going to do it. I know what I'm doing. And suddenly that's where you can pick it apart. And all of a sudden it's now a net negative. And I think that's a great thing to be able to say, I just want to make this the right way. And if you know better than me, let's do it, because we're all going to get credit if it works. And we're all going to but I'm only going to get blamed if it doesn't work. So it's in my favor to not make this bad.
Yeah. And I think as a director, you're always riding that line of your own vision and pushing your own vision and the singularity of that vision, but then also being open to the talent that you've hired. Yeah. You know, your production designer who has a great idea, and your DP who's like, what if we put the camera over here? So in a way, there's always a balance between that collaboration being a conduit for the other talent that you've hired to surround you and having a vision. But that's really heightened when you are the outsider coming in. And this is not my culture. This is not my community. I felt hyper aware of that. I felt like, you know, if I was going to be the one to tell this story, I had to make sure that I had people that were empowered on set and had a real voice in the process every step of the way, from the writing of the script through production, through post, and even through the release of the movie. I mean, it's important to me that there were deaf eyes on all the publicity that was going out in the world. It's like, I want to know if, you know, something's going out on social media, that it's going to be captioned, or the trailer is going to be captioned, or the movie screenings are going to have open captioned. And those are conversations that I think hearing people just might not think of without having involvement from the community.
Oh yeah. Well, I know we have to wrap, but I think all those things are part of why it's good. And also, it's just an amazing movie. It's you feel good, and like it does everything. Like I'm gonna be obsessive and like pitching it for awards. So
that is about this. So sweet. And like, nothing would make me happier than for these actors to be recognized. Like, I think, you know, there are incredible performances in this film, and I can take credit for hiring the right people and putting them together, you know, but I'm so proud of what they did. And like you said, this family feels like a real family to me. I was just in Gloucester, Massachusetts, walking around, and I literally felt like I was going to run into the Rossies. And it was such a weird feeling, because I'm like, no, they're imaginary. Yeah. I made them up. No, they don't exist. But
there's your next movie. When you're you're like, no, other people have made that movie. Let me make something that only I can do.
That's the Charlie Kaufman version, where I'm walking around, the filmmaker's walking around and actually meets the characters from the movie, and they exist now. That's actually not a bad idea. I'm going to put a card on my wall right now.
There we go. I just want the shout out. No, but thank you. Congratulations again. This is fun. Any excuse to rave about this is good for me.
I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Of course, my pleasure.